Hello and welcome along. So today we're going to talk about one of the greatest characters of all of 40k, Ahzek Ahriman. But this will be a video about his early years, his life leading up to and during the very beginning of the heresy. So Ahriman was recruited very early in the Legion's history, back on Terra, on old Terra, when the Legion was first being formed. Like all of those recruited at this time, he was born in a family of the nobility of the Achaemenid Empire. So this was an empire on Terra that was an ally of the Emperor, and so had been spared much of the worst elements of the warfare that had been going on Terra. One of the better places to be born. As members of noble families, the lives of these early Thousand Sons recruits would have been even better than almost anybody living on Terra. So they were quite privileged in that sense, and they were also recruited because of their potential psychic abilities, and they were taken away to be trained separately from the other legions, probably in or under the Imperial Palace, or the area that would become the Imperial Palace. Ahriman also famously had a twin. They were recruited together. His twin is Ormuzd. They were very, very close, and unfortunately, when the flesh change would hit the Legion, Ormuzd would be taken by it. And this was Ahriman's first sort of tragic event in his life, and it had a massive impact on him. It led him to have a deep fear of mutation and a sort of willingness to do whatever it takes to stop it happening, to protect the Legion from it. It is believed that this is kind of like his key moment of personality formation, which would lead to him feeling the need to perform the famous rubric of Ahriman, where he tries to purge the Legion of mutation into the far future. Not just his twin has died. Many of the Legion are falling to the flesh change, and it gets so bad that eventually the Legion looks like it will have to be purged, or it will just simply fade away as there's so many more die than are recruited. This rampant gene seed mutation is both accelerating and seemingly impossible to cure. Now, of course, fortunately, Magnus is found, and somehow, miraculously, Magnus saves the Legion. He purges the Legion of the flesh change. Everything is normal, and he didn't have to do anything dodgy to get to this point. So from Ahriman's perspective, Magnus is a savior. He's not only his gene sire, he's the leader of his Legion. He is the person that has saved him from his worst fear, and saved his brothers as well. So although it's too late for his twin, he has at least saved him personally and all of the other people that he cares about within the Legion. And Ahriman is deeply affected by this as well. So he has a very deep and intense loyalty and connection to Magnus, and a kind of almost a hero worship of Magnus. And Magnus is, an incredibly powerful and charismatic leader, someone with incredible abilities that only really the Emperor could have matched in terms of being awestruck. So for Ahriman and the other Thousand Sons, Magnus was as close as it's possible to be a god without being a god, because the Thousand Sons, unlike some of the other legions, weren't prone to worship as such, like for example, the word bearers would be. So although they had this great interest in the warp and knowledge in general and just understanding, they didn't have a religious side to them. They did firmly believe in the imperial truth, but they just wanted to know everything and understand it, study it. It was a route that would lead them to the warp and to the ruinous powers. It was a very different mindset to the word bearers. Now, relatively early in Ahriman's time in the Legion, he was seconded to the word bearers, so he had to go and live and work with them for 5 years, and he did find this quite uncomfortable. We can imagine it wasn't easy for someone who is a firm believer in the imperial truth to live amongst a Legion who were at that time firm emperor worshippers, and so that must have been an incredibly hard time for him. But he was sort of befriended by Erebus. Now, Erebus is, as we all know, the worst person in all of the 40k universe. And Erebus has always been bad. He's bad to the core, right? He's bad. He's terrible. He's twisted and corrupted way before everybody else. And he tricks his way into the Wordbearer Legion. He assumes another person's identity who's murdered. So everything he does is for his own reasons. And so befriending Ahriman is really for his own purposes. Probably it's to do with gaining knowledge from Ahriman. We don't really know, but we know that he's an unredeemable bastard, and anything he did was definitely not out of friendship. But he does it convincingly enough that Ahriman believes him to be a friend at this time. But of course, later on, Erebus will be revealed to be the terrible person that we know him as. And all of the sort of manipulation in the background of what he's done to get to the point of the heresy will come out at some stage. And Ahriman will become aware of this and will realise that essentially he's been betrayed. Erebus was never his friend and was just using him. The biggest betrayal from Erebus for Ahriman is his part in the Council of Nikaea, his part in getting Psykers banned from the legions. But really the whole fake friendship is obviously also a deep personal betrayal. In his time in the Legion, he rapidly rises through the ranks, and at some point he becomes both Chief Librarian, First Captain, Commander of the Secondment, Magnus's personal bodyguard, and Magister Templi, which is the leader of the Legion's Corvidae cult. So the Thousand Sons are divided it into 5 major cults, of which he leads the Corvidae. The cult responsible for precognition, that's their main power, they're seeing into the future. And so their job in a military sense is to detect threats to the Legion. Events that might happen can be either exploited to their benefit or need to be avoided to protect themselves. So he, as the head of the Corvidae, is also the chief strategist amongst the Legion and as an advisor to Magnus. He also has a relatively close relationship with Ammon, who is equerry to Magnus, but also is the previous leader of the Corvidae. And so he was kind of like his mentor and father figure in some sense, who he'd replaced, but who had remained still a very important member of the Legion. And as Magnus's equerry and the captain of the Ninth Fellowship, he was still a very important and relevant member of the Legion, and probably the only person in the Legion that came close to Ahriman's level of authority and respect within the Legion. Now, another interesting thing about Ahriman is he was one of the few Astartes to be publicly in favour of remembrancers joining the Legion. So these are essentially the artists and journalists of the 40k universe who were expected to document the events of the Great Crusade and preserve it for history. Ahriman saw that as a good thing, which many of the Astartes didn't. Many of the Astartes wanted to keep what they did relatively quiet because many of them were doing things that they knew the regular human population of Imperium wouldn't understand or wouldn't appreciate, and they felt that they were doing the things that needed to be done to protect people. So these were necessary evils. They didn't want this to be exposed and to them to be judged by these people that many of them felt were their inferiors and did not like this idea at all. Whereas Ahriman saw it as a positive thing, where he could say, look, we aren't doing this weird mysterious stuff that you think we're doing. We're actually good guys doing good things and for you, and that everyone will realize and be like, oh yeah, this sorcery stuff, psychers aren't that bad. Maybe we should lose some of our terrible prejudice against psychers, because actually they're doing great things for us out in the Great Crusade, helping humanity and broadening the knowledge of humanity, because he was an optimist. He was, even though he suffered this terrible tragedy of losing his twin, he was very much an optimist at this time and saw all the best things in humanity and wanted to gain knowledge, preserve knowledge for the benefit of humanity, just as Magnus did. Well, this went so far as he actually took one of the remembrancers in the company of the Thousand Sons under his wing and began to train him in the ways of the Thousand Sons. And so he revealed quite a lot of secret information to this remembrancer. This was Lemuel Gorman, I think it's pronounced. He became as close to being a friend as someone can be to an Astarte when you're not an Astarte. It's quite hard for the human Astarte gap to be bridged, because there's just such a big gap in the physical and mental abilities. But there was a friendship of sorts, certainly a respect and a level of trust that developed there. And of course, he would go on to betray Ahriman after the heresy starts, turn to the point where he actually despised Ahriman to an enormous level. Now, partly that was Ahriman's fault, but he did kill someone very close to Lemuel Gorman. He did it for what he felt were the right reasons. He did it to help to find out what was going on, to preserve the Legion. This betrayal pales into insignificance. So the next one, during the later parts of the Great Crusade, the Space Wolves make an attempt to essentially infiltrate the Thousand Sons. So a small detachment of Space Wolves spends a reasonable amount with the Thousand Sons, and amongst those Space Wolves is a psyker named Oathweir Weirdmake. That's right, yes, Oathweir Weirdmake, and he is a real twat. Let's put it that way. And so he is, like most Space Wolves, a major hypocrite. And that being a practitioner of psychic powers, he pretends to be friends with Ahriman, builds up a friendship, learns some stuff about the Thousand Sons and their practices, and then stabs him in the back. At the Council of Nikaea, where where psykers are banned from being within the legions, it's revealed that Weird Mate was just pretending to be Ahriman's friend. Yes, another fake friend for Ahriman. And he was just trying to get information on them so he could use this as evidence against the Thousand Sons at the council. And of course, the ruling of the Emperor at the Council of Nikaea goes against the Thousand Sons. So Ahriman, being there, is like hit by this massive betrayal again. He's like, well, the guy I thought was my friend that I shared that information was actually betraying me. The Empress betrayed us. And all these other people that have come up and given witness from the other legions that we thought were our friends have betrayed us. And even on top of all this, even worse, he actually has a brief moment where he gets the mind of Magnus put into him, and he realizes the deal that Magnus has made to save the Legion, and so now he feels betrayed by Magnus as well. Now this information is taken back out of his mind by Magnus, so he doesn't technically know that, but some kind of residual feeling of betrayal and disappointment in Magnus remains. So he's actually staggered by the events of the Council of Nikaea. But even though all these terrible betrayals keep happening to him, he still remains a good person, a loyal member of the Imperium, and he carries on about his business. But over time, he and the other senior members of the Corvidae cult start to feel that there's something deeply wrong. There's something bad happening. Something is wrong here. There's something being held back from them. And eventually, Magnus would reveal that he's had this terrible vision of the future, that Horus is going to betray the Emperor, and decided finally to tell them about it. Again, this is Magnus holding things back from Ahriman, and Ahriman feeling like, well, this person I put all my trust into, I almost was worshipping, this close, is holding stuff back from me again. And who can I trust? It's got building up within inside of him. And now, of course, he still remains loyal to both to the Emperor and to Magnus, and he helps Magnus try and attempt to warn the Emperor, as do the rest of the Legion. This doesn't go very well, of course. Magnus makes a minor mistake and destroys the entire Web Braid project. For God's sake, so when we're going to hear the end of this? So Magnus, feeling guilty, he shouldn't do, entirely the Emperor's fault and not Magnus's fault, but Magnus feels incredibly guilty about what he's done, and he locks himself away in a tower, or think is a tower, and doesn't speak to anybody. And so the Legion is left to be run by Ahriman, and however, Magnus has helpfully put up a massive mental psychic force field around Prospero, stopping any information getting in and out. So the Legion doesn't know what's going on. Ahriman doesn't know what's going on. They can't find out what's going to happen. They just know something terrible is going to happen, but they don't know what it is. And they can't speak to Magnus to find out what he knows. And so in their paranoia, they just desperately try to get information. Unfortunately, they never comes until the entire Space Wolves fleet turns up with a massive Imperial Navy force and the Custodes and the Silent Sisters with their black ships. They're suddenly in orbit, and then they realise that, oh shit, all of our orbital defences have been abandoned because Magnus has sent everyone away, and our fleet's not here either because he sent them away. Oh, and half the Legion's not here because he sent them away. Oh, shit. And the burning of Prospero begins. At this point, Ahriman realises that he's been betrayed again. And so now the Imperium as a whole has betrayed them again. It's literally sent an extermination fleet to destroy them. The Space Wolves under Russ have betrayed them, even more than they had before at the Council of Nikaea. And Magnus has betrayed him again, and Magnus has held back this information. So what does he do? Well, he decides, look, we're in this mess. All we can do is fight. We're not going to give in. He kind of realizes why Magnus has done it, but he can't bring himself to just give in and be killed because of the mistake Magnus had made with his pact with the ruinous powers. And so he and the other senior members of the Legion decide they're going to fight, and of course they do. And to be fair to them, considering the incredibly difficult circumstances set against them, they do incredibly well. And they fight back against this force that's come to destroy them. They actually come close to winning several times, even with Russ on the other side. And Constantine, Baldur, two of the most powerful warriors in the Imperium, countless numbers of custodes, space wolves, Imperial army, and silent sisters cheating and interfering with their psychic abilities. They still managed to survive. They still managed to fight back. They still managed to even get to the point where they could be winning. But of course, the flesh change then hits with a massive vengeance, and the flesh stain starts popping up everywhere. And every thousand suns are starting to spontaneously turn into chaos spawn. There's tentacles everywhere. It's a hideous scene. Now, at the last minute, Magnus does decide that I can't let this happen, and he bursts out of his bedchamber where he's been lying in his own filth in his underwear for months, and he runs naked through the streets of the city and saves the day. Well, famously, roughly 1,000 suns, and now their name matches up again. And of course, one of the survivors is Ahriman. So Magnus has transported these survivors across the galaxy, and they're on the planet of sorcerers, which is this horrible hellscape with the sort of decaying remains of the city around them. Magnus goes and locks himself in a tower again, and Ahriman is left to deal with this. And he's like, again? Ahriman does what he always does. Well, he loyally serves Magnus and helps him throughout this period to regain the many shards of his shattered soul. But the relationship between them has changed, and that deep respect that he had for Magnus is gone, and he had seen the flaws in Magnus. He can't get that back, and the relationship would never be healed again. And so, although Ahriman isn't truly broken by these many series of betrayals that he suffered, he is changed forever, and he will become a much darker version of himself, of course, who will go on to live for many thousands of years into the future, desperately trying to get back everything that he felt was lost at the burning of Prospero. And maybe he will one day. We don't know, but he probably won't, given that it's 40k. And so that is the story of Ahriman, and how he was changed by a series of betrayals from being one of the greatest heroes of the Imperium to one of the greatest enemies of the Imperium. Oh, one last thing about him. He was a maker of great wine. He made the best wine in the Imperium, apparently. Or at least Prospero made the best wine in the Imperium, and he made some of the best wine on Prospero. So, you know, multi-talented. Not just a sorcerer, not just a soldier, but a vineyard. I think that's what you call someone who makes wine. Well, he grew the grapes and then made the wine. I don't know if he personally made the wine. I don't know if he was standing in a barrel squashing grapes with his bare feet. He might have been. I don't think he was. I think he just had some fields where the grapes grew, and he tasted the wine at the end and said, "Yeah, that's a good one." I've kind of lost my train of thought now. Anyway, before I completely lose my mind, please like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time.